Welcome to Movie Heaven, Movie Hell, FrightFest Glasgow 2019 special. I'm Keith Eyles.
And I'm Simon Aitken.
There we go.
Not really. I had to because Simon's going to hear it.
Yes.
I'm William McLaughlan. I'm going to be Simon's stand-in today.
You are, yes. Simon is actually... He didn't get to enjoy FrightFest this year because he is very busy in post-production of his feature film, Modern Love. So he wasn't able to brave Glasgow this year for FrightFest. So I'm very pleased that William has joined me.
And it's, in Simon's defence, it's the best reason to not be watching films is because you're making them.
Exactly.
So great, excited to see it.
Exactly. So well done, Simon. And God, we're a pair of losers, aren't we?
Hurry up, Simon. We need to get this watched.
So, yes. So, William, for you, this was actually your first FrightFest, wasn't it? I've done this for a few years now. What did you think?
I thought it was brilliant. It's actually my first film festival that I've been at as a patron, and I haven't been working. So I really, really enjoyed it. It was even more film watching and even less stress than I've ever experienced at a film festival before. I really enjoyed it. I'm not probably the most natural horror fan in the world. I wouldn't say I've got a particular genre, maybe sci-fi if I had to kind of compartmentalise myself, but there's so much overlap between science fiction and horror. And I'm quite open-minded, I'm going to watch anything. And we saw some absolutely brilliant films, really stuff that I wouldn't have been exposed to otherwise without being in that sort of environment. And it's the vital part of film festivals where you are going to be exposed to things that are out with your sphere of awareness. Yeah, no,
absolutely. I mean, we saw 12 movies over 2 days, so it was quite full on. And these were movies from all over the world at various levels of budget and production types. And I have to say, I thought this year, having been to this for a few years, this year the bar I think was quite high.
The quality of film was excellent in general across the festival. What we discussed and I thought was really interesting was the way it was programmed by FrightFest. The first day was more indie, slightly more experimental, maybe slightly less constrained commercially, and then the second day was the more commercial, higher end, bigger budget films. I think that was a really good way to do it. You got this sort of the films on the first day were maybe required a little bit more patience.
Mm-hmm.
And they all fit really well in terms of the programming. And then the second day, even that first film that they showed in the second day, which I think was Ruslaka, which is going to be the Siren, they said it's going to be called.
Mm-hmm.
That was quite a good bridging film.
Yes.
Because it was maybe more commercial than some of the films in the first day, but it was the more indie one of that second day's programming, and then it went into the more sort of commercially distributed, higher end films on the second day.
No, absolutely. The other thing I particularly noticed this year for me was in terms of the atmosphere of FrightFest. I felt more included than I ever have. The guys that run FrightFest, Alan, Paul, Ian and Greg, were all, they made time to come up and actually say hello to me and chat with me about, what I was thinking of the festival and everything. And that's something that I've not really experienced with them previously. So I really appreciated that. And I think one of the reasons that the atmosphere was so good this year is because last year there was horrendous weather. And many people...
They mentioned that,
yes.
It must have been bad to have been still a year down the line talking about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, my plane... I was going to fly. My flight was cancelled. And then the train was only going as far as Carlisle. And, it was a real trek to eventually get here. Whereas
all you need is an inch of snow to disrupt all travel and ability to get to your job and all that sort of stuff. And I think maybe for, you know, the guys at FrightFest, there's an element of, if you do have a year that's a bit of a washout like that for no, you know, way that you can possibly control, I bet they were raring for it this year and really excited for it. And I certainly spoke to Paul and I think Ian at one point as well, just as a sort of passing punter. I didn't necessarily even know who they were until they were introducing the films. But I really like that about film festivals. And one of the things that I thought was amazing about FrightFest was having, once you got your wristband pass for the weekend, you had an allocated seat. And in general, I mean, people did move around, obviously, depending on the frequency of how many folk were at each screening of each film. You could, if it was a lesser busy screening, you could have moved. But I loved being next to the same sort of people, because you could get the opinion of the folk next to you and start creating an idea of like, okay, right, that person likes that sort of film and this other person likes that, and here's the middle ground where I'm sort of finding myself. And that's what's brilliant about the film festival sort of element, where you're going to get the access to like a whole wide variety of stuff. So there's always going to be stuff that you like and stuff that you don't like. Mm-hmm. It's different for everybody. And if you love film, you know, like all of us and all of the listeners, that's where the kind of value at a film festival is.
Yes, no, absolutely. It was, you know, particularly fun this year, and good atmosphere, you know, and we had some friends that couldn't make it this year, which was sad to, you know, to not have them around. But I also, you know, we made some new friends on this, and, you know, I got to finally meet, actually, a little shout out to Mike Munzer of the Evolution of Horror podcast, which is a great podcast for any horror fans, which I presume you'd be listening to this because you're a horror fan.
Yeah, I'm going to be listening to it after speaking to him. That was good.
Absolutely, it was nice. He's been on the podcast a couple of times, and I've been an avid listener of his podcast, and it was nice to actually sort of meet him in person finally and have a chat. So no, it was really good, really good weekend. So I guess we should
let's talk about the films.
We should crack into the films. I'm going to say here right up front from the get-go, this is going to be a spoiler-free chat. We're just going to have really an overview of the films. Many of them, if we talk too much about, we will give away spoilers, and all of these are just sort of prior to release. In fact, nearly all of these films were world premieres, or at least European premieres. So, we don't want to give anything away for these films that are going to be released, but it might give you an idea of some stuff to look out for, because most of these have distribution deals where they're either be on at your local cinema or some sort of streaming service or home media, something like that, somewhere down the line. Yeah. So it kicked off with a film called Lords of Chaos, which is a UK and Sweden co-production, and it starred Rory Culkin of the Culkin fame,
who was quite chameleon.
Yes, he was quite the comedian.
I didn't recognise him until either the end of the film or the credits.
Yes, no, absolutely, and it was it centred around a satanic hard rock band it takes place in the 90s, isn't it? In the mid-90s. Right. And it's quite an interesting film because it really sort of delves into image in a big way.
The scene, yeah.
And it featured some really decent performances, but this film's got quite a bit of controversy around it because it does feature some absolutely horrifying violence, knife violence in particular.
I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. It was extremely graphically gratuitous and violent,
but it also had as well a satirical nature about
it was
the whole
funny
thing.
I mean, there was good comedy in that film as well, in a way that detract from any of the horror.
Yeah.
Hard line to tread, to get both reaction, the laugh and the fright, without compromising each other element. If that makes sense, if you don't sacrifice the comedy because it's scary and vice versa.
No, I felt the same. I mean, it really worked, and as I said, it would satisfy the taste of both, the people who enjoy sort of comedy, horror films, but also at the same time it had massive graphic violence, that actually literally made somebody ill.
Yeah, well, that was quite surprising.
So, but fortunately, that person was okay. But there was a little bit of chaos on the opening night, in so much as the film had to be stopped temporarily because this film actually did make somebody ill and make somebody throw up, and so there's your warning.
Dramatic.
There's your warning.
And do you know what I liked about Lords of Chaos, and keeping it spoiler free? What I really liked about it is I think that it's so often the case in big film and commercial film, and sometimes in the lower budget indie sort of sector, that people don't treat showing violence with respect. And I feel like Die Hard's a good example of irresponsible violence, in my opinion, where whatever there is, 180 deaths or something, and your listeners will be rolling their eyes at me getting it wrong, but there's a high body count and John McClane's just pulling the trigger in his gun, blowing away baddies, and you don't see any of the effect of that gun violence. And I don't feel like that's responsible. Whereas this film, even though it's been under attack for comparisons to child suicide in the news recently, or the big problem with self-harm and Instagram and the internet, what I really liked about it was that self-harm and knife violence are horrible. They are damaging and gratuitous, and the film did not shy away from showing that in a much more realistic sense. It didn't sugarcoat it, it didn't try and glamorize it or beautify it. It was hard to watch at points.
It was. Yeah, no, it was incredibly hard to watch. But, by the same merit, it had its, it wasn't up for not poking fun at itself as well, which is like you said, that's a really hard balance to find. But I think they did find it there, and I would recommend this one. It is going to get a release apparently, and but it has Arrow Films are behind this one.
Right, they did a lot of representation at FrightFest.
Yeah, they are the sponsors for FrightFest. Should have probably said that up front. There you go. So that was it. Kicked things off to a good start.
I really like that. Yeah, commercially viable. I would say definitely one to recommend people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, next up we had a Canadian film called Level 16, and this one was basically, it took place in a very dictatorial boarding school, of a very sort of Orwellian feel to it, where young girls were basically being taught, cleanliness and obedience and what it means to be a good girl, but in a very sort of militaristic way, and it deals with that. I can't say a lot about this film without going into spoilers.
No, and don't, because also this is the only film that I didn't make it to the screen to go and see, and I do really want to watch it, because there was a lot of people said that they really enjoyed it.
Yes,
and that's always interesting. And the fact that you're reticent to tell me too much. I mean, what I would ask, and we're talking about these generally, is to what extent do horror filmmakers have a responsibility to have a kind of social comment on society in the same sort of way that you can do with sci-fi and stuff? What's your sort of views on that, or should it just be entertainment for the sake of entertainment?
Well, I think you can have I don't think they're mutually exclusive necessarily. Well, they can be. I mean, you can have both in a film, or you can have one or the other. So, but I mean, I think some of the best horror films are ones that make some sort of social comment and if you like, hold a mirror up to the world and says these things. And with regards to this has a again, I don't want to go into spoilers, but it's got quite a sort of dark undertone about what's really going on in this film, why these girls are really the conceit is, you know, that it's like a sort of finishing stroke boarding school, where eventually these orphaned girls are going to get adoption, and it's much more twisted than that, which I can't go there, as I said. Otherwise, I do enter spoiler territory. But yes, I think there is a message to this film for sure. But at the same time, it is a good piece of entertainment. It's very slickly produced.
Cool, that makes me want to see it.
It's very slick in its delivery. And it centres around sort of the relationship, particularly with two of these girls, and deals with things like guilt. And if I had to criticise this film, and I'll say this for a number of films at the festival this week, is it slightly outstayed its welcome. It was... This film's 101 minutes long here, according to the credits, and you could have told this in a really tight, slick 90 minutes, and it would have really worked.
That's frustrating because I feel, in general, with contemporary cinema, that's a complaint that I've got, and it's weird because studios obviously like a 2-hour mark film because you can get X number of screenings in a day, but I feel somehow maybe over the last 10, 20 years. It's the sort of Lord of the Rings Casino Royale effect of having huge epic endings that last forever. And there were several of the films that I felt at this year's FrightFest where the ending could have been really punchy if it just been stopped minutes before they ran the credits rather than have a little bit extra. And I think it made me certainly think about, from a sort of creative standpoint, how do you get that really powerful ending? How do you deliver that to the audience?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you know, we're only talking about 10 minutes in some cases.
And in some cases it was one shot.
Yeah.
Or one like 10-second edit would have had the effect to have made the ending better.
Yeah. I mean, there was the one thing I felt quite sad about in this film, which was very gripping all the way, but there is one particular line of dialogue, and the way this line of dialogue's delivered quite near to the end of the film, which actually made the audience laugh. But the thing that made me feel sad for it was it wasn't actually supposed to be funny. So they were kind of laughing at rather than laughing with. And, you know, that maybe let it down slightly. But I'll be honest, I enjoyed it. I thought that this was, you know, a decent horror thriller.
Good. Well, certainly what you said and what the other half a dozen people around us were talking about when I came in, I would still watch that. That's on my list to see. Cool.
Okay, so that's level 16. Next up, we had a film called The Dead Center. Which again, this was a US film, a low-budget US film. I don't know, what were your thoughts on this one? Because I think you particularly enjoyed this one, didn't you?
I really enjoyed the execution. I thought that this film had a kind of visual quality to it that was just really pleasing to me, and it really fit what I think a contemporary horror film should be. Certainly had all the elements that were being developed in it were frightening and do, you know, scare me. Again, it's hard to talk about something like this where I feel like there's elements I want to criticise, but it may give away too much plot to do it.
Yes.
But certainly portions of the film take place in a hospital and deal with kind of mental health. And the director of the Q&A, Billy Sinise, he was interesting, talking about mental health being something he was wanting to explore. And when the film worked for me, I thought it was really atmospheric. That's what it totally shone, was its atmosphere that was created, and the sort of sense of impending doom. Mm-hmm. It had a slight kind of 90s J-horror aspect to it that I really bought into. Mm-hmm. So I like this film, and I actually think it's maybe one of the ones that I would watch again.
Yeah, I particularly liked... this was a film that kind of had two protagonists on different journeys that eventually sort of cross paths. Yeah. And one of them in particular, I thought, did a really good job and was really believable.
Yeah, that was a superb performance from that actor. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, but it's quite difficult. I mean, it's to do with a unidentified suicide victim that goes to this hospital morgue, and the medical examiner sort of, he knows his name, but he's no idea where he's come from, and the body becomes reanimated, and it's kind of it's a mystery. It's kind of a procedural mystery. But as I said, we can't really
get into the meat of it.
If I go into any more, it really is gonna sort of go into spoiler territory. But
I mean, I would say for horror fans, that's definitely a film to watch. Even if it's, if you're critical of it, there's still a huge amount of value, and I did find it frightening. And for me, that's probably the most important thing when I watch a horror film is, does it scare me? And I'm thinking about this a little bit afterwards, the last couple of nights. And that, again, it's one of those things about horror film, or film in general. Am I continuing to be affected by it? Mm-hmm. And I was. I think I'm really looking forward to seeing Billy Sinise do more stuff. And obviously Shane Carruth of Primer is an actor in this film. Mm-hmm. I really liked him. And I'm always going to be interested in what Shane Carruth is doing after Primer, because that's such a, incredible indie film, and the story behind that is, and how it was made is awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like
mind
this.
Bender for sure.
Yeah,
Primer is
a good one.
Yeah,
Primer. My friend's favourite film. Yeah, I've watched it loads and still, don't have a clue. So well done in that respect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So that's The Dead Centre. Next up was a independent British film called Here Comes Hell, which I thought was incredibly enjoyable.
I loved it
because this film completely embraced from start to finish what it was, and it was basically, it's like a comedy horror, but it's sort of set in the 1930s, and it's filmed in black and white. It's in the Academy aspect ratio. It's got very heightened performances from its cast, and it really does kind of embrace that, haunted house, Agatha Christie, whodunit, kind of murder mystery, along with some. It was that kind of mixed with crazy sort of almost like sort of Evil Dead style comedy horror.
Here Comes Hell is the perfect example of, if you don't have a studio backing you and giving you your budget and stuff, you have to go hard or go home. Like, you need to lean in hard into what makes your project unique and your vision, your vision. I think a lot of filmmakers, especially when they're starting out and they're like Jack McHenry and Olivia, what was Olivia's second name? It's not there. And the producer, Olivia, were doing, I think you've got to realise you can emulate other filmmakers and make it work, and they did a brilliant job of being unique and having their version and their voice.
Yes. This
film, if you get a chance to watch it, watch it. It was not particularly long. The bits where it was brilliant. It had my standout moment at the festival, actually. Mm-hmm. Just really, really good. And it shows what's achievable outside of a studio setup,
yes,
outside of a TV network, because I don't think a studio would make a film like that.
No.
I don't think they'd have the, for the amount of money that they'd have to put into it to then do an international distribution or even a domestic American distribution. It's not worth taking the risk that it might just not find an audience, and it was awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, this was incredibly low budget, and it was a group of very young filmmakers.
Yeah,
that
we were
made
jealous.
This.
They were
it was
very
good.
talented.
And but they knew their genre. They embraced it. They knew their films of that era because there was a lot of sort of Hitchcockian moments in
they
it.
had good.
There was and some
stuff.
Hammer, a little bit of Hammer, a little bit of Hitchcock. And it really did embrace that sort of 1930s. Haunted house type.
Yeah,
type
and
film.
There's some. Let's be critical as well. I don't believe in sort of not kind of picking things apart as well. There were elements in terms of production value or execution that maybe weren't as slick as some of the other films at FrightFest, but because of the creative commitment to this, it just did not matter.
No.
And we spoke about things like, not just specifically to Here Comes Hell, but things like your close-up of your actor. If it's soft and you've got the performance, it doesn't really matter as long as it's not like super blown out or whatever. Equivalently, you can have a perfect shot with the actor lit perfectly and using the light and so on, and if the performance isn't there, you don't have time to bring it out in direction, it can be flat. Mm-hmm. And I think that this again is one of these examples of a film where the momentum that's going once that film started is, I was just on board and really excited, and especially when the performances were so overblown and big, it really worked very well. And I'm excited to see what next stuff these guys do, because it's going to be good.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this film is one of the few films that wasn't actually over bloated in terms of it's a tight 75-minute
and that really works.
Story, and it really works. And as I said, everybody's really committed to it, and it's very amusing and very nicely done. And as I said, good to see them embrace that kind of traditional look and feel. Yeah,
and it was a fresh take as well because it's contemporary. So.
Yes,
nice.
Yes. No, very good. Okay, next up, we're still on day one here. The penultimate film on day one was a
good luck explaining this.
It's a Swedish film called Black Circle. I have to say I really enjoyed this film in so much of, again, it was a 100-minute film. Could have maybe been 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes shorter if I had to be ultra critical. But what I really liked about this film was the commitment to the in-world logic.
Yeah, we spoke about this all weekend. This was one of our things that we were geeking out over.
Now, how do we sort of explain this without it being spoily? It's to do with first of all, it's called Black Circle, which feeds everything feeds in, the whole mise-en-scene feeds into this, because it's about a vinyl record, an LP record.
What's that, Keith? What's a
Oh, shut up! And hold on, that's hip now. So shut up.
I should have a record player.
And basically, the B side of this record is supposed to be almost like a self-help, hypnosis type recording, and it revolves around this young woman, and her sister recommends it to her to help with sort of life improvement. And she says that since she's been listening to this, her life has improved in her business side, her productivity, her work, everything, her well-being. So she listens to it, but actually, and you as the audience, you're quite drawn into this because I was talking on a podcast recently about the Ring film and how you're sort of as an audience, you're sort of complicit with it because you watch the tape. And it's the same in this. We listen to this recording, so we're kind of in on it as well. But of course, it's something far more sinister.
Yeah, I mean, I love this, and awesome that you mentioned The Ring, which I think is probably my favourite horror film. Certainly one of the only 2 horror films that I've had to turn off and stop watching because it was really like upsetting me, and then go out and buy it on DVD the next day and watch it in the daytime. So I got no problem about admitting that I'm a wuss when the filmmaking's on point. And Black Circle definitely tapped into a lot of that kind of style of Ring with the kind of cursed artifact.
Yes.
And that breeding real problems for everybody in the story. Again, what you were talking about, internal logic, the film really, that's the backbone of how that works in Black Circle for me.
Yes.
I don't need to know what the actual map or plan of how all the moving parts in the film work on a story level. I just need to know that the filmmakers understand that and have worked it into the film so that all the information that I get as the viewer makes sense, if that kind of holds water. And what I think was awesome in Black Circle is that everything that you see as the story unfolds and the characters attempt to deal with their situation, it all makes sense in the story. Even if you don't understand it as the viewer, because you're obviously being deprived of information on purpose to make it more frightening and so on. I really, really like that. And it's loads of work that then more than half of it doesn't appear on screen or in the dialogue or any of that, but you have to have those elements to make your film credible and make sense. And this film achieved that effortlessly, it seemed.
Yes.
And also completely dripping with style and atmosphere.
Oh, yeah.
And kind of, it's making all the hairs on my arms go up.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And definitely one I want to watch again more than once with my friends, because it's our sort of thing. That's my kind of film.
Very stylised. And it's important to mention for fans of sort of classic horror films that it starred Christina Lindberg, who is a Swedish actress that has quite a pedigree with some earlier horror films and has been doing it for many years. So
and she said at the Q&A this is one of her first films in 2 decades that she's been doing, and holy shit, what a performance.
Yes.
From the moment she's on screen, I thought gripping.
Yeah.
And frightening, even without doing very much. And I think that's a total idiot thing to say, I suppose, but there wasn't huge amounts of setup or pre-establishment of her character, and really her opening sequence is doing that, and really absolutely mesmerising performance from her. Very powerful stuff.
No, definitely. So Black Circle, very, very worth checking out, which brings us to our last film from day one, which apparently has actually been retitled, but we saw it under the title Dead Ant.
Dead Ant?
Dead Ant. Which was one of the jokes in the film.
Yeah.
This was an absolute piece of horror trash fun.
Yeah, I think it was an exploitation movie.
Totally an exploitation movie.
Had a lot in common with Here Comes Hell, because it just went right into what it was doing. Completely didn't give a shit. Didn't worry about whether or not it was going to be, effective or not. And that makes it, I think, to have that kind of almost lack of care about whether you're doing too much or not, it really makes it work.
Yes.
Like, they didn't worry about being, offensive or schlocky, or if a special effect didn't work. That is part of what carries this film.
Absolutely.
And it was awesome. And we watched that like 11:30 at night, right?
Yeah,
so you'd seen 5 or 6 films, and I'd seen, whatever, one less.
Yeah.
But it was really, really good.
It was
really enjoyable.
Very entertaining. I mean, it's quite high end. This is US film, directed by Ron Carlson, and it stars people like Sean Austin and Jake Busey and Tom Arnold.
He was awesome.
Again, you know, like you were saying, it totally leaks into the exploitation thing. I mean, there's gratuitous nudity in this film, ridiculoly over the top
the
gore.
opening scene is worth going to like see the film to see how, like, from the moment going, you know, you're either the sort of person that's going to walk out and not like it, or just instantly hate it, or you'll be there. And it does, as any opening scene should in a movie, totally set up everything that's coming afterwards.
Yeah. Now, I'm sure you're all there saying, well, what's it about then? So essentially what it is about, it centres around an ageing glam metal band from the sort of late 80s. And they're supposed to be going off to a festival. And, you know, they're all sort of real crazy characters that have... and what made me laugh, or what I thought I liked about this film, was in terms of everything about it sort of feeding into embracing the sort of B-movie comedy horror film that it is. Even things like, you know, Sean Astin was wearing a cap that says, "It sucks to suck." And one of them had a T-shirt saying "Go big or go backstage," and you know, tear shit up, and all this sort of thing. They had the sort of, you know, heavy metal type T-shirts with those kind of logos on them, and it basically revolves around on the way to their concert, they stop to get a drug.
Yeah, they're going to take peyote at Nocella.
Nocella, which was kind of a joke in itself. Again, I don't want to spoil all the jokes here, but yeah, they go to Nocella, but they, as I said, they get this drug on the way, and the drug's given to them by this Native American, and the main rule with taking this drug is that you must not mess with nature in any way, shape or form, or cause harm to anything in nature. And this isn't a spoiler because this is the conceit of the film. And essentially, one of them, literally pisses on an ant and kills an ant, and this makes 4 giant ants to come and attack them for the rest of the film. And as I said, I think the new title is going to be Attack of the Giant Ants or something like that. But as I said, Dead Ant was the title we saw it under. And you know, from there, you can probably use your imagination as to what it is. But it's a lot of fun. Again, I thought slightly longer than it needed to be. I know I'm sounding like
minutes or 20 minutes.
Exactly, I'm sounding like a stuck black circle here, aren't I? But you know, it was slightly longer than it needed to be. But it was very amusing performances. And I mean, they have a song in it called "Side Boob." For heaven's sake.
I don't want to even talk about that because I'm going to start singing it, and it's really good. That was testament to make a song funny, not an easy thing to do, and catchy as well. And they did it on several occasions. Yeah, I really like that, and it you know, it pays to be open-minded and to go into stuff trying to be as fresh as possible. Because I'm, like lots of people, really critical and prejudgy of stuff. And it's trying to let go of that and just enjoy stuff.
Yes.
One of the things at FrightFest that I found interesting is prior to the screening of each film, when the film's being introduced, there's a huge slide being projected on the screen that contains an image from each movie. And I find that I don't want to look at that at all, and it totally fills your entire field of view, so it's hard to not to, you've got to. But with Dead Ant, I managed to just try and block that out, and the image wasn't so descriptive that you were able to tell anything about it, and I really was surprised by this film. Yeah. Which is nice, you know, it's good to see something and be like, wow, I did not expect that in that way.
No, but I mean, this is basically a schlock comedy horror B-movie, but with recognisable Hollywood names,
big cast,
and you know, it's silly nonsense, but it's fun. So if that's your sort of bag. It was certainly a good film to finish the night on because it was light and light and silly. So that brought us to the close of day one. I have to say, I don't know about you, William, but I'm actually finding this kind of difficult because it is very hard to talk about films without
telling anything about them.
Yeah, without sort of giving you an overview without being spoilery.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think as well you want to kind of, like, for the purposes of this particular podcast, we want to have a kind of discussing and exposing the films that we liked and enjoyed at FrightFest this year because they aren't on release yet, without giving people any more than you would get in a trailer, say. So you can talk a bit about it, but if we go in too far, it's going to just spoil stuff that isn't even out yet. I'm a big believer if you haven't seen the film in the first week that it's come out, you're open to having it spoiled for yourself if you're not offline and not listening to podcasts and stuff.
I also am aware that we're both kind of waxing lyrical about everything.
Well, we're on a high. It's just been like 48 hours of 24 hours of film.
We're sleep deprived.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, we're sleep deprived.
So let's just very quickly sum up those films on the first day. Would you have said there was a particular kind of vibe to the selection and the curation and the presentation of them from FrightFest?
No, I mean, I honestly think that we got some variety here, which was nice. And when I say variety, there were a couple of non-English language films in there. There were definitely a mixture of different budgets. We had from studio films through to really low budget, independent films. And yes, they all had their horror elements, obviously, but there was also a big mix of subgenres there. So we had some quite sort of dark, serious, and graphic films, but then, as I said, we had some sort of much more comedic type films. So I thought there was quite a variety. There were also, it's fair to say we haven't even mentioned, but on the beginning of some of these films were some short films, and thematically some of those fed very well into the films they were shown with as well. Duality. There was one called Proxy, which was about duality, and that sort of fed into very similar to what Black Circle was trying to do. And
I would be happy to get a short film in front of every feature at the cinema rather than a million adverts for cars and stuff like that and buying soft drinks at concessions and stuff. But to have that kind of outlet in FrightFest, it's brilliant. To see new short films is not always easy, even if you're trying to search for them online on Vimeo or YouTube or whatever outlet. It's hard to sometimes find that, and part of the benefit of the festival is it is a platform for filmmakers to come and present to an audience their stuff. And some of the shorts were absolutely awesome. Probably my favourite, the standout one that sticks in my mind was The Scarecrow, from I think a first-time filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, again, like leaning in hard into your concept and being confident. It's better to fail massively and fuck it up trying to get it really, really good, because the payoff, I think, and it is the case for Scarecrow, I think it was so stylish and really simple, and it did exactly the opposite of many of the films that were having that particular criticism of being slightly too long.
Oh my god, I mean, Scarecrow is probably less than a minute,
I think so.
Yeah.
And how that's such powerful use of economy, and it was like a kind of telling of a joke, and that there was the setup and then the punchline almost immediately. But within that, there's incredible grading, excellent performance, brilliant editing, cinematography was on point, and what better a calling card if there's 10 short films on show. That's the one I remembered, and it's like a tenth of the length of some of the other ones.
Yes,
really brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, we've just mentioned a couple there, but there were other short films as well, and again, the quality of those was pretty,
production
pretty
value
good
on them, and the skill on display was impressive.
Yeah,
they picked good shorts.
They did indeed. So into day two, we have another film that kicked it off that's also gone through a title change. This is going to be released under the name Sirens.
Yep.
Or is it The Siren?
The Siren.
The Siren.
It's going to be.
But we saw it under the title The Rusalka.
Yep.
Now, you particularly liked this one.
I loved it.
Remember. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Up there with Here Comes Hell and Black Circle from the first day. Really,
Okay.
really brilliant, confident filmmaking. I thought lots of subversion and bringing fresh, new, sort of contemporary elements into horror. Lots of daytime filming, which I always find really interesting in horror films.
Mm-hmm.
It's so easy, I think, to like nighttime lends itself to tapping into our fears.
Yes.
Who's following you in the street, or what's that creak in my house? Can I make it to the light switch or whatever? This definitely had the realistic elements of what is horrible, you know, loss.
Yes.
and you know, failure in your social life or relationships and stuff. Those were very much illuminated.
Yes.
I also,
one of the things I liked with it is you know, like with Mike Flanagan's film Hush, where the lead character in that was deaf. In this one, interestingly, they made the lead character in this film a mute.
Yeah.
And again, I thought that made for. Well, particularly in a horror thing, you think about the first thing somebody does if they're in trouble in a horror film is they cry for help.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
there's that nightmarish element.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I was asking the director Perry Blackshear about was he has cast a Asian American actress in the lead, or one of the lead roles, and then there's the mute character, and there's also a gay couple in it. And quite often when I'm going to the cinema, for me, if those sorts of characters are in a film, I think it's a tremendous disservice can be done if you don't write them as sort of proper three-dimensional characters,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have diversity for the sake of diversity. But this was so representative, I felt like it was much more rounded and rich and credible and reflective of the world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, and what I really liked about the representation in this film was that they didn't make a big deal about any of it.
No, I mean that's how to do it.
I mean the you know the gay character in it, he just mentions in a line of dialogue his husband.
Yeah,
and that was it. I mean,
yeah.
there was nothing. No big deal made of that at all.
And it's refreshing. It's nice, rather than, like, I've been to the cinema with gay friends and seen depictions of, you know, gay relationships, and it's awful. Like, it just doesn't, it's not real.
Yeah.
And I think that's a depressing experience for anybody to see an approach on a perception of what it's like, and it's uninformed. Whereas this was, I thought, really respectful. And it added to the richness of the film rather than somehow highlighted it as artificial.
No, I agree. No, this was very enjoyable. It was a good way to kick off the second day. I think first films they always have a bit of a problem because you've got to kind of
get into the sort of viewing mode again after just having watched half a dozen things
exactly, and probably been out drinking the night before,
and been up late,
and not that we'd know anything about that, right? We were well behaved. But this definitely worked. Again, I'm going to say, I really am harping on about this, but I felt that with this movie, although not a long movie, it still felt. I don't know. I felt like it could have ended just a little bit sooner than it did, but. That was just because I was struggling with the morning thing.
Yeah, it's tough. That was at like 10 a.m. we saw that one.
Yeah.
I think I'm not done with singing the praises of Rusalka yet. I really liked how much of a visual film it was.
Yes.
It was show, don't tell all the way for me.
Well, particularly as you've got a mute character again,
totally.
You had to totally show, don't
and
tell.
And hey, that guy, his performance, is it Benjamin? Was the actor or the character? Let's give him his credit.
I don't know. I don't know.
Evan Dumichel.
Yeah, unfortunately, sorry, we've not got notes in front of us.
It's so recent after FrightFest that we've decided just to go while we're fresh and we have the response. But that performance was superb.
It was.
Again, Perry Blackshear talking about how he had written dialogue for the mute character and had it in parenthesis in the script. And then when they went into rehearsals and pre-production and started workshopping and improving to get to the shooting part of the story, he then tweaking and rewriting the lines that the character wouldn't speak but the actor would act. I find that fascinating. That's such it's for me, I love hearing that process. I think it's totally invisible unless you go and look for it and you read it or see interviews with the filmmakers. But he was absolutely switched on, that guy. Yeah. And luckily, there's more stuff coming from a lot of these people who have been at FrightFest. Yeah. And Perry Blackshear is one of the people who's got something in the pipeline.
In fact, I'm really glad you've mentioned that, because something, again, I will say about this year's FrightFest in Glasgow, in contrast to the one we had in London last summer, was the fact that they really went back to doing proper Q&As again. This was something that was one of my criticisms this past summer, was the London one. There were a lot of introductions to films, but because they had such a packed schedule over multiple sites, they weren't doing so many of the Q&As. There was only a couple. Lee Wannell was one of the main guests, and he did a Q&A on Upgrade. But for this, they really did get as many guests as they could, and they came back and did proper Q&A sessions where, I have to say, hats off to the FrightFest team this year. They asked really good, intelligent questions and allowed for a lot of audience participation with that as well.
Yeah, so I totally agree. I mean, I think it is the benefit of having your filmmakers at your film festival, and totally. The curated questions were well thought out and engaged, and it got the ball rolling, and then they opened it to the audience. And I love audience questions. I much prefer them to any other kind of format of asking, because it's so pure in response to a film, to ask your viewers, what do you think? Yeah. And some of the questions are totally left field or really weird kind of esoteric stuff to ask. Other ones are really stuff that I wouldn't have even thought of ever asking myself, and it's like, wow, what an insight into the way that people think.
We both asked questions as well, didn't we? And got free DVDs.
Yeah, they were good at
so that was lovely.
Giving out tons of films and like merch, posters, t-shirts. So I think that's also nice as well, because it's rewarding of your community that's supporting the film festival, and they're watching the films. Yeah,
this did really have a community feel. I just wanted to add that. Right, well, next up is a film. It's probably the one film where you and I actually have a slight difference of opinion here.
I wouldn't agree with that. On you go.
Well, yeah, very good. It's a low budget UK film called Automata or Automata. Automata. Yes, there's a, and this is by FrightFest friend, I guess, director Laurie Brewster, and written by Sarah Daly. Now, these guys have had films previously at FrightFest. A couple of Halloweens ago, they had one called The Black Gloves, which was very much trying to do a similar thing to Here Comes Hell, and you know, embrace that kind of old school 1930s kind of RP-ish stuff. Yeah. This one again, they're trying to sort of embrace a mixture of, I guess, Hammer horror and Roger Corman style filmmaking, in so much as it's very much the same team, both in front of and behind the camera. Now, with this one, I have to say, first of all, my hat's absolutely off to them, because again, they are churning these films out. They've already. These guys
are producing one film a year at the moment. That is so prolific.
Exactly. They're getting this stuff out there, and they're getting on and doing it, and I applaud that. And they're doing it with a fairly low budget, and they're doing quite ambitious films as a result. Yeah. That though is where my criticism comes in on this one. Is I wanted to be 100% behind it, but I felt that it was slightly too ambitious for their budget. And what I felt this film didn't do, which Here Comes Hell did perfectly, is Here Comes Hell embraced its comedic horror, and the fact that, you know, it knew what it was. It and then absolutely embraced that. This film, I felt, was trying. I felt tonally this was a little bit all over the place, and again, in some areas, the audience were laughing, but the film, I don't think, was actually trying to be funny.
Yeah.
I think it was trying to be, you know, very serious, heightened drama. And I don't think they necessarily pulled it off in this. It was good to see somebody I've acted with before played the lead villain in this, Jonathan Hansler.
He was good.
Who is always good. He's a very, very good actor. So it's good to see him in this. But for me, and I'll shut up in a minute and let you say your bit, but for me, I don't think this 100% worked. Basically, it's about a 300-year-old clockwork doll, which was wonderfully acted, by the way, I have to say, by Alexandra Holm, who had been in their previous films as well. So she's doing quite well for herself with this sort of thing. And I thought she played it really, really well. And so I'm not criticising that, but I just think that the film, and also the film for me, it almost felt like Lord of the Rings Return of the King, in the fact that it felt like it had about 7 endings of people screaming and pounding at doors before it actually got to the end. and again, I'm sounding like an awful asshole here by criticising what was a very well devised project. Otherwise, I just think it didn't quite know what it was, and that's my criticism.
I think that's totally valid, and I actually agree with your criticisms.
But you love this.
The only thing that I wouldn't agree with is that you felt it was maybe hard for you to get 100% behind it. I was 100% behind this film, despite, you know, things that are shortcomings with it, or maybe could have been done more effectively, or shortened and tightened up. And let me be critical. There were various things that could have been done to have improved it in my viewpoint. But despite all that, I think the things that I enjoyed about it totally outweighed any of the things that I didn't like. And I wish I could see every film with that kind of perspective, because then you'd never be disappointed or unhappy.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, one of the things with this is I just thought there was kind of a inappropriate, slightly cringeworthy central relationship in this film,
absolutely,
which I didn't buy into at all.
I like that, because I felt that was, I mean, one of the big things that I've been looking at when we've been watching the films is, do I think this is horror? Is a question that I ask myself, and if yes, what is it that makes it, you know, not maybe horrifying or horrific, but what's that kind of lingering, dwelling, nasty element of the movie? And that's the sort of stuff that upsets me, not kind of slasher stuff, which is just unpleasant, and can give you a jump scare. But what's the thing that you're going to dwell on? And this is about, without giving away too much, about sort of familial, incestuous kind of sexual abuse. And you know, that is something that is horrifying, and that is real, and you know, horrible for anybody that's a survivor of that sort of experience. And I think the film actually, it maybe does seem quite schlocky, or, you know, not quite as together and tight as it could be, but that underlying subtext really was not pleasant, and it did scare me, and it did lend itself to quite upsetting sequences in the film. Probably my one major criticism of this is and it's a criticism of more than you know, just this, was that it was slightly too long, and if they'd condensed it, it could have been much more punchy and made those points and had that subtext, and it would have been a lot faster and a lot more to try and keep up with as the audience.
Because interestingly, it was only 95 minutes, but I thought it felt a hell of a lot longer.
Yeah, it did have, and the kind of historic backdrop meant that when we were moving between flashback and present day, seemed to take ages, but just by scope of its, you know, time period, between the two different settings.
The other thing about it that for me felt inconsistent was parts of this film looked absolutely beautiful, okay, and it beautifully lit and really embracing what it was trying to do, whereas other areas, and I appreciate, again, being a filmmaker myself, I know about tight schedules and production budget and all this, but there were a few things where stylistically I thought they could have, particularly with some of the period stuff, if they'd maybe given it a sepia tone sheen or something to it, just to make it look a little less like, oh, we've got 4 costumes and a couple of rifles.
I've been harping on all weekend, less is more.
Yeah.
And one of the brilliant things about film as a medium is that you can, once you've figured out how you're doing it, once you've got your conceit bought by the audience, you actually don't need massive amounts of expense or production value to kind of hammer home points. And sometimes trying to be too ambitious or too direct with what you're talking about, instead of being quite simple and subtle, can be less effective. And I think to tailor everything back, where scenes in the horror films that have really affected me that we've been watching over the weekend, it has been the more, I don't know, quiet or toned down element that has been effective. And I think that's why I liked Rusalka so much, was because it wasn't, even though, and that shoot must have had its problems with being so heavily featuring water as health and safety, continuity, lighting it and exposing that kind of shot. That's all complicated. But because visually that element was so simple and so clearly demonstrated in a really poetic, thematic story sense, I think that was really effective and part of what I liked about this film. Whereas Automata has so many moving parts and so many plates spinning, and we've got to try and keep production value consistent across 5 or 6 different sorts of stylistic settings between social realism, period drama, and then this kind of wacky, like crazy lighting, Hammer horror-esque sort of,
Well, it's exactly to my point. Is I think it didn't quite meet its ambition. But at the same time, I absolutely want to say here, for the record, I'm not taking anything away from Laurie Brewster for doing this. And interesting that it was written by Sarah Daly. Some people could say because of the subject matter, or was this written by a guy? But no, it was written by a woman and well written. And, I don't want to take anything away from this entire team, because while we're here talking about it, they're out there doing it. So, my hat is absolutely off.
I'll be seeing their next film. One of the sort of hills that I want to die on is, national cinema in the UK in general. And when you go to the cinema and you watch whatever it is that's set in New York, or it's probably now quite cool to be setting your stuff in Portland and like Rusalka and places like that, one of the things that's really powerful about seeing national cinema is it's identifiable. So seeing a film shot in Fife, I was there 2 weeks ago, going to Dundee to go and see the V&A and going across to Newport and Tay and stuff. And to see a film shot in Scotland with Scottish actors and that kind of weather, the establishing shots being identifiable and stuff, there's a resonance there that I don't get when I watch American films or world cinema. It's something different about it. And I think part of the reason that I love this film so much was that there's an immersion and a relatability to it that I don't get with other stuff. So I really liked it. Yeah.
Well, while we're on that point, before we move on to the next film, I just want to ask something sort of general about the FrightFest, because I'm one of these, I've some of our friends that are listeners out there, they really do, before a festival like FrightFest, they very much do their research, and they they've looked into the films before, and know a little bit about them. My approach with this stuff, that some could say is lazy, but it's just how I like to enjoy entertainment these days, whether it's my BAFTA screenings or indeed something like this, is to know as little as possible about the film, and not even what it's about or who's in it or anything, and just going in and being not tainted in any way or influenced any way by anything outside, to the point of not even knowing what actors are in it or who's directed it or anything. And I kind of enjoy personally consuming films in that fashion. I just wondered, from your point of view, how did you find the fact that I know you didn't know too much about any of the films going into it, and obviously being new to FrightFest, you didn't really know kind of what to expect either. So what was your feeling there?
Well, I basically took your lead. Like I said, when we were at the beginning of the podcast, I've sort of done film journalism and worked at film festivals before, and part of the sort of responsibility that you've got if you're interviewing somebody or you're a PA or an assistant to somebody producing
got to do
things,
your research.
you need to know your stuff
absolutely
inside out, off by heart, and you've got sometimes you've got 20 minutes to research a film, get the synopsis up, know what's happening, research the background and your 2 or 3
know
leads
and your
filmmaker and your producer, and you don't know who you're going to talk to and stuff.
If
somebody's making a movie and it takes 1.5 years or 2 years to get to the stage where they're at a festival, you need to be, if you're working at a festival, in my opinion, you need to be moving heaven and earth to know what you're talking about. So I didn't know anything at all about any of the films at this. I intentionally got rid of my FrightFest programme that my friend had brought for me from town a fortnight ago or whenever. I didn't want to read anything about it, because at this I was being a patron and a viewer, and I don't normally get to do that in my sort of professional endeavours when I've been at other film festivals, and I loved it. In my sort of personal watching of films, either if it's a word of mouth recommendation from a friend or somebody I know, I often stop people and say, look, don't tell me anymore. If you're recommending me this, you know my taste, I'm going to watch it. But if it's stuff that I see a trailer for, sometimes I just go hook, line and sinker and read about all the background drama behind the production, or who's involved and what's the inspiration, and I'll follow it. And I don't feel like there's one way or the other makes a film more or less satisfying for me.
No, there's no right or wrong.
I can't affect whether the film is going to be good or not objectively and so on. But interesting. So with all these, I knew nothing at all.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, next up, which I'll be honest, for me, I thought this was a particular highlight. I don't know whether we're supposed to pronounce this finale or finale or what, but it's spelt finale.
Yeah,
basically.
I think finale. I would go with that.
And it's a Danish film, and I thought this was proper. I really enjoyed this. Okay, it's proper brutal, proper nasty. And to the point that they actually have kind of like a
2 disclaimers, one from the director himself and the FrightFest crew, and then one at the beginning of the film.
In the film, a disclaimer that what you're going to see is quite horrific, which we are at a horror festival after all, right? But I just thought this was really, really well done. It was slickly produced because it was done on quite a low budget. It was based on a novel and adapted, and it's proper. It proper fits into that sort of dark. Not so many films come out of Denmark. We're used to, we're used to the sort of Nordic noir stuff being,
looks of Sweden and Norway do a lot, and Iceland and stuff.
Exactly. So, but this really worked. It was basically, it centered around 2 young ladies that work in a sort of 24-hour fuel station convenience store in the middle of nowhere in Denmark.
Already scary.
And and it's and it's on it's coinciding with a night where there's some sort of sports
the final the
championship
cup final or whatever. It's quite kind of
it's vague,
intentionally vague,
yes.
Which is something to think about. I mean, when I think of a horror film, and when you were telling me coming to Glasgow to FrightFest, that's what this finale is, what I think of when I think of a horror film.
Yes.
So it had, like you said, really slick production value, and it also was upsetting, I think, to watch. And I find it kind of an interesting process when I'm watching horror films. I'm a big comics reader, and I've been reading some horror comics recently, not even particularly in prep for FrightFest, just because that's what I was doing. And I find when I watch films, I'm quite hard to shock. I think when you've made films and you've got the background in production, you know all the sort of gags and gimmicks that are used to generate the image. I mean, like, the image is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter how you're getting there in terms of like creating an effect. So I find it generally really difficult to get immersed in films, and it's why FrightFest was brilliant, because after like the first two films, it was just sort of lying back and letting it wash over me and enjoying it, rather than being really analytical and critical and so on. With Finale, I think how do you be effective? How do you upset and shock people? You know, there was an element of sort of, I mean, extremely gratuitous violence.
Oh,
let's not.
Yes, yeah.
Like,
I mean,
you know,
torture porn
like,
to the extreme.
It was torture porn.
I mean, you know, this film has an interesting sort of split narrative.
Yeah, the structure of the film you were particularly enamored with.
Yeah, I was, and I thought it really worked. And, you know, again, I don't want to... This is awkward because I don't want to give any sort of spoilers away here. But this kind of worked on a... one of the things I thought was interesting is I felt like it kind of dealt with a class system as well. So you had your sort of two working class... attendance to this, night shift in a small garage.
Agnes working class?
Well, actually, no. Agnes was okay. She has a backstory, which we won't get to exactly.
Punch holes in your analysis.
But I kind of like the fact that the voyeurs in this were all the front seat voyeurs were affluent, elite, privileged. Yeah. And it's that kind of perversity that we've had throughout entire history about how human beings kind of like to see this sort of violence. And it also, again, taps into the sort of internet and the sort of anonymity that you've got when you're watching, like, you know, this kind of dealt with almost like sort of snuff content.
Yeah.
And it was, it was massively disturbing, which a good horror film should be.
Yeah, I don't know how I maybe just didn't quite affect me like that. I don't know. I definitely enjoyed the film and liked it. I did
enjoyed's an interesting word, isn't it?
It's not a happy film or a positive film, but. You know, if you've had a shit day at work, you don't want to come home and listen to some top 10. You want to listen to like Radiohead or something that's going to be fitting of your mood. And film is no different. You don't always want to go and watch Frozen or whatever light-hearted thing's going to be escapist and fun. Sometimes you do want to have your idea that the world's a horrible...
Adam Green's Frozen.
That's a superb film.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's much more like that. I've had a bad day. Let's endorse that.
Yeah.
I mean... Finale, I did like the film. I feel like its violence was it was responsible in the sense of it was showing the effect of violence. It was gratuitous and pornographic, I thought. I feel like almost it would have maybe been more effective to have had that scene be inferred violence, where we see the reactions of the people that are, essentially perpetrating it by paying for it.
Yeah.
But maybe that is not the way that you make that film. And Soren, the director, did tell us part of the reason that they were funded. He essentially wanted to have inferred violence and some of this stuff, but he was told, if you're going to go and get this budget, we want to see it all on screen.
Oh, so, yeah. And they certainly showed it. This is not for the people with a weak disposition.
Some people did leave during the screening as well, which I think is always testament if you're going to actually go for doing the really nasty sort of horror film, sort of torture porny stuff. Like, do it right. Like, don't just do a little bit. You need to get that kind of wall of just revulsion going.
Yeah, and this really
totally
went for
it. It tapped into tons of the stuff that I think is really like socially relevant. The internet being this sort of wild west of who knows what is going on, and there's this surface level of okay websites, and then you've got the dark net that's continually being vilified by the government and, you know, dangerous to go on and so on, and all the sort of marketplace of that is absolutely what this film's looking at and talking about.
I mean, this was there with Lords of Chaos in terms of the brutality.
Yeah, I think
horror,
that's
the horror
brutality.
brutality.
They were the top level of just violence and gratuitousness.
Yeah. But I actually thought the production of this was very slick. That's what I was taken with particularly, and it's, you know, you totally, for better or for worse, you totally bought into that world.
Yeah, and incredible performances from the two leads, petrol station workers.
Yes,
brilliant. Really well cast, well directed, great writing. I think that carried. I mean, like all the other stuff really carried the violence for me. I don't think it would have worked had it just been like, despite having good production value in those special effects sequences, the thing that made it good was, I suppose, the story being executed really well.
Yes, and also the fact that you did actually give a shit about
you
the
cared.
characters.
And they did have arcs within that first half.
Exactly. Yeah. They spent time with the structure on this, that you got to know your characters, and they kind of earned the audience's respect as individuals. But then they would go and they'd have something to sort of keep the hardcore horror fans happy for a bit, and then come back. And
I think as well, when they introduce Agnes, who I would say is the main character, she's the daughter of the petrol station worker. I know I don't want to get too much into story, but this is all front-loaded, so I feel okay about doing it. Stop me if you don't like it.
No, I agree.
But, you know, they introduced Belinda, and one of the... so she's the girl that works full-time in the petrol station, and when Agnes comes in, it's mentioned that she's the boss's daughter. The owner of the petrol station's daughter. And I think that was such a brave decision for the filmmakers and the actor to go with, because it's very difficult to, I think, criticise or have a negative introduction for a character. It's very difficult for an audience to then get on board.
Yes.
And you have to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of redemption.
Yes.
Because audiences are completely merciless, and I think if you don't like something or they don't back your main character, you can lose the film.
And this film wouldn't have worked if you didn't give a shit about those central characters.
And they're both very, very well rounded and like a lot of depth to them. Yeah, I really liked it.
Yeah. Cool. And talking about really liking and really giving a shit about the central characters.
Probably my favourite film of the day.
We have mine too, I think. We have a South Korean film which is called The Witch Part 1, The Subversion. So,
a title that I simultaneously hate and adore.
Exactly. I mean, this kind of had everything in what this film was. I was talking about earlier about tonally and films not sort of having the balance or whatever, but this had everything in so much as you had heartwarming drama, you had very, very comedic moments and performances that worked really well, again serving character and whatever. You had extreme action scenes, adventure scenes,
and it was bonkers
action scenes. Yeah, and then of course you and there was a mystery thriller element with a gore element as well. So you kind of, it did sort of, I mean, I heard one or two people say, did this really belong in a horror festival? And I think it absolutely did, because it is horrific. But one of the things, I mean, this kind of, I have to say, for me personally, this is how high I regard this film, is I think, game changers for me in terms of action fight scenes and use of firearms and all this was, you had Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and then several years later you had The Matrix, which is doing this. And I think this, I'd be bold enough to say goes to the next, level in one of them. Because essentially, to give it a bit of context here, what we're talking about with this film it's essentially a super soldier program.
Yeah.
You know, which has obviously been done loads of times before in literature and cinema, and it reminded me a little bit actually in terms of television of James Cameron's Dark Angel.
That's one for me to go and look, because I don't know
from the
it.
late 90s. Okay. And you know, and it had so you know, it's a government experiment on young children to essentially program them and make them better and stronger and faster. You know, the whole classic super soldier kind of program. And there's an incident when the film starts, and one of the girls actually, who's an 8-year-old girl, she kind of gets away from this incident, and she ends up being adopted by a very ordinary working class, down to earth family, and then this film picks up around the time that she's 18, and involves you know a talent show. I mean, do you know this? I think you're hitting the nail on the head, saying that there's so much going on in this. One thing that I would touch on is I can't believe that there were people who thought that this didn't belong at a horror film festival. The subtext in this film is about child exploitation and sex trafficking and that sort of you know, backdrop. And that is horrific, and absolutely the film, just because it is skinned almost as this kind of like super slick action movie, part of what makes that what was her name? What was the character's name? I can't remember. Koo Jae-yoon. Okay, so the girl is there, the protagonist, the main one.
Like, that character works entirely because this is a horror film, and it's the only reason I feel like as a viewer that I'm going to back her, because really she's a baddie, I think. But you can understand and justify why she's doing the things that she's doing in this story, which are horrifying.
Because it's ultra violent. I mean, this is ultra violent film, but also, as I said, it has these really kind of. I remember one moment I kind of nudged you, because there was a scene that went from comedy to high emotional drama within one scene at a dinner table with no action at all. And that was really good. And there's a great standout performance in this by her sort of best friend.
Yeah, that was such a great, you know, like realization of that. And it really, like that you know, supporting actress is a great foil for the lead, and it worked really well. I mean, I want to kind of touch on it being called The Witch Part 1. I feel so burnt out and like not interested in shared cinematic universes anymore. I can't be done with it. I don't want to watch 20 films to understand one. It's bad filmmaking at this stage, in my you know, opinion.
Coming from the superhero fan here, but yes.
Anyway. And I think you could maybe say that this was a kind of superhero.
I think it totally was.
Element to it. They did have powers, even though they weren't really heroes. But one of the things that I really liked about that kind of element to it, with being part 1, is I don't feel like this, like, it was a bigger story than one film, but would it be a whole shared cinematic universe? I really hope not, because part of what made that work was it was packaged so well, it was developed so well, and I could see it being a serial story, but I really hope they don't.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I said to you when the credits hit, which I loved, apart from saying I fucking loved that, I said I can't wait for part 2.
Yeah, me too. I'm really excited.
And it did actually leave me wanting more. It really did. It's not so much a cliffhanger ending, and again, we don't want to go into spoilers anyway, but
it does expand, doesn't it? It does lead into the next stage of the story.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost like a kind of a limitless element to this as well. Is there's kind of in order to have these enhanced abilities, there is kind of a price to be paid, a serum that needs to be taken, and that's not too spoilery, I don't think. No. But I mean, this was just great.
It's hard, I think, in a film and what everybody's trying to achieve when you're making a movie is to get your audience. And let's be specific with horror films when I'm saying this, you want to get your audience to think, when's the shit gonna hit the fan? I want to see, you know, whatever it is, a scary ghost or a monster or somebody being hacked up or this torture go ahead or whatever it is. And good filmmakers will then make you regret the moment in the story that you wished for whatever it was that you're now getting. This film really drew out all the tension, and then once it got into the sort of spectacular action-packed stage, it was absolutely awesome. I love this. This is totally my kind of movie, and it was worth going and watching all the films just to have seen one thing like that. I would say up with Rusalka, one of my favourites.
But I mean, we are talking a really strong day because
then the next film also excellent,
which was called Freaks, directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam Stein, and this starred Bruce Dern and Grace Park, wasn't it? Grace Park
and Emile Hirsch
and Emile Hirsch, yes, and this oh god, how the hell do we explain this film?
Well, again,
there's a lot going on here.
There was kind of similarities I felt to The Witch, Subversion Part 1, with this film, but also it was a film that was kind of tonally doing different things and bringing in different elements, and it, like The Witch, also had excellent tension and lead into its story. And Zach Lipovsky said that one of the touchstone kind of inspirations was Room.
Yes, it definitely started off. Yeah, I mean, it essentially the setup is it starts off with a 7-year-old girl called Chloe and her father that are locked up or have locked themselves up in a suburban home because of what we assume is like some sort of apocalypse that's happened outside.
Yeah, not clear what's going on.
It's
for
very
a long
unclear
time.
For a long time.
They really milked, I think, effectively not giving you information in this movie, and I think that there's a boldness to that makes it work. And quite often, I think, as a filmmaker, one of the things that's really difficult is trying to judge how much you can do, like, because you want to obviously do the very bare minimum of anything to get the effect. It's harder for the audience, and it's more rewarding to keep people intensely invested in trying to work stuff out, and they really nailed that.
They definitely had the mystery box going for a big element of this film, and again, this is going to be kind of hard to talk about because.
Can we say what the genre ends up being, sort of?
I don't think that's going to ruin it. I mean, I kind of felt like it literally was like a superhero movie. It was almost like a sort of Supergirl type film in some respects. But at the same time, it really subverts.
There's a lot of kind of a new sort of way of looking at it. It's quite X-Men in some respects with that kind of approach of how would society view people who were different.
Hence the title Freaks. Yeah, but yes, it does deal with that. And this is kind of this is a fairly slick production again, isn't it? This has got that.
They got the money on the screen. Yes, they really the production value is extremely impressive in this film. Yeah,
and then the performance. I mean, it's always good to see Bruce Dern, in something. But the performance by the young girl was really well. I mean, she was kind of felt to me like a young Drew Barrymore, like the sort of fire starter E.T. type Drew Barrymore, I thought this really worked. Apparently, again, this isn't spoilery, but interestingly, this is currently in development to become a television series, which is supposed to take place a few years after where this film ends. And I think that it absolutely has that in terms of the world building.
Yeah, it's set up for being greater than just one movie.
Yes, you can have definitely sort of arc storytelling. Because again, it deals in terms of social stuff, social issues. Back to your question earlier on about that. I mean, it does kind of deal with that sort of thing quite well, but at the same time, you're absolutely right that it's very ambiguous about what the.
Yeah, I have problems with the message in this film. I need to I think I'm maybe going to watch it again. I don't know.
Can you say what they are without spoiling it?
Well, it's kind of hard because you do I don't. Part of what my issue is to do with the very end of the film and the kind of stance that the story and the kind of takes on what you've just seen. Because I'm a comics reader, part of the byproduct of that, unfortunately, I'm sure many of your listeners, if they're comics readers, will agree, is that we tend to have very strong opinions about what things mean and what a superhero is an analogue for. But, like we were talking last night with people outside the GFT, mark of a good film is that it generates discussion, and absolutely this film is something that I would talk about and defend my opinion on and so on. I thought those guys did a really good job. It's something that I'm dwelling on and thinking about, so they've ticked that box there for me. Its lasting impression is making me think about, do I agree with that? Is what I've seen what they've actually intended to say, or am I taking as a viewer something that was maybe unintended as a byproduct of that? So I think that's interesting, but I think it's too spoilery. Maybe if we
it's too spoilery.
Zach and his co-director on, we can have that conversation.
And at the same time, there's a hell of a lot of spectacle in this film as well.
Totally.
So there's loads to enjoy, and it's a pretty fast moving film. This is one again that didn't feel over bloated for me. This actually felt just about right in its delivery for me anyway. Yeah. Again, we might slightly disagree, and this is again the good thing with FrightFest is the differences of opinion.
Yeah, totally, and it's it's the benefit of any kind of art is that you have an individual personal response to it, and regardless of what that is, it's valid.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find really interesting in kind of modern fandom is how strongly people back different horses and buy into whatever it is, MCU or Jurassic Park sequels. Are they valid? Are they not? Or the big one at the moment, if I can say the S word, Star Wars. Whether what
I thought we were going to get through one movie heaven podcast without the mention of the.
Can't let Disney off the hook for any of that. But it should be a case of people saying, I'm a whatever fan, not what kind of a fan are you. That's where I think a lot of that comes down to. But
cool. Okay, and I have to say another thing that this year's Glasgow Fright Fest really accomplished for me was normally the last film of the entire festival can be a bit of a stinker. In fact, 2 years ago, the final film at Glasgow was a film that I probably thought was the worst film I'd ever seen. Wow. It was that bad. And this broke the mould. Again, a great fun film to end on. So we ended on a film called The Horde, which essentially, and they did it so well, it's done like a reality TV mockumentary type show dealing with people who hoard things and how that relates to paranormal evil spirits and whatever. And it had this wonderful ensemble cast, and they really did sort of capture. They had like the beginning credits and those little sort of
the VT kind of with graphics and introductions for each character and stuff.
And it was hilarious. I laughed a lot,
and we were quite kind of tired by that stage after having watched 5 or 6
films. Well, this
films
started at 11:30 p.m.
and we'd been there for more than
10 a.m.
more than 12 hours. So it was heavy duty.
Yeah.
But I think what really for me carried this film was just the quality of the comedy. It was really funny.
Yes.
And what I thought was interesting as well is I feel like good comedy films, I think the 2 Deadpool films definitely do this. I'm maybe not going to laugh at every joke, but there's other people in the audience that are laughing at stuff that I don't even get why it's funny. And I think that that's a tremendous skill to be able to have, is to build so much sort of hilarity and fun into your movie that different people get different things from it. And certainly there were some bits where everybody was shrieking and sort of laughing and stuff. And it's probably that kind of a film that to me still reinforces why it's relevant to go and see films at the cinema with an audience and not just watch them at home. Even if you do have a projector and you can emulate a kind of cinematic experience on quite a big scale, I think you, with that shared experience, you do have this kind of rush that goes through the audience.
Yes, well, the audience loved this.
Yeah, it was very successful.
And again, unusual because a lot of people tend to leave for the last film and whatever. Yeah. But this really worked. The characters that they formed in this really worked really well, because you had your sort of makeover expert. You had essentially an ensemble of characters that were split into like sort of 3 teams, I guess. So you had your kind of makeover experts, one that dealt with the sort of visual aesthetics of it all, and the other dealt with the sort of psychology behind actually getting rid of all this shit that you don't need. And then you had like a sort of paranormal team that was kind of like those characters in the Insidious franchise, that Lin Shaye heads up, where they had sort of all their technology that's supposed to kind of detect whether there's strange vibes or whatever going on in a particular room and all this sort of thing. So you had that team, and then you had the clear out team. They were my favourite. Falcon and the Duke. Yeah, which were basically the guys that were like, they were the ones who'd put on the overalls and the face masks and go in and talk about dry rot and damp walls and blocked sewage and all of that sort of thing. And they actually they recruit a
local, don't they?
Who's
set in Ohio, so it's a total dive.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like an unemployed, vagrant, homeless person kind of thing who has to report to his parole officer or whatever.
Do you think he was a non-actor, that guy?
Oh, I don't know. The thing is, that was the other great thing with this film, is they really the fly on the wall documentary aspect of it works. So, the referencing the camera and all of that sort of thing really worked. It really, it felt like one of those shows. Not that I watch a lot of those shows.
I'm a massive reality TV fan, unfortunately. I'm constantly watching Gordon Ramsay.
Whereas I hate it, but at the same time, I've seen enough to actually get the joke and the conceit of this film, and I thought that they did it really well, and they characterized really well. And again, the subject, the person that is the hoarder, that the show's about,
saving him
again. He was fantastic,
and he's kind of like the dry kind of part, isn't he?
Yes.
He's carrying all the kind of hilarity and stuff by being the normal kind of heel part, almost.
And what do all these idiots know about my stuff?
One thing I love when I see it in comedy films, and it's probably never ever the intent, but I love, and I think Zoolander is the perfect example for me, this is when you can see the actors are having to work really hard to act because it's so funny.
Yes.
And I love that, and I think it translates so tremendously in film when you're watching. And this was a film where it was quite clear that everybody involved was really struggling to keep it together because it was so silly and funny. It
really worked. This was a lot of fun. Again, we've already talked about this, but most of those shows, to my knowledge, are normally around the sort of 40-minute to an hour length.
It's never going to be longer than that.
And of course, this was a 100-minute movie or whatever it was, and again, the last act felt a little long, although I was still, because again I cared about these characters, I was totally invested in the plot, so I didn't have necessarily a problem with that, and maybe it was just a case of getting a bit tired towards the end, but it's particularly the beginning and the setup. These characters had me howling, and they were doing their own sort of little video diaries as well.
Yeah, it was awesome. I mean,
there's one character you didn't need to see sitting around in his underpants, but the actor committed to it and did it, and it was very amusing. And there's also a great scene where they follow a guy to a thrift store who basically goes to buy more junk. Yeah. And that was a hilarious scene.
Clever.
And also there was, of course, a real cringeworthy sewage joke, which was quite
and
sickening to see.
There was legitimate horror stuff in that film, and it did. I mean, even just the kind of well, I don't want to talk about too much about the ending of the film and stuff because we're going to not spoil stuff. But definitely there was that was a horror film as well, and had a legitimate reason to be at FrightFest, despite just being really funny and comedic as well. I think it had definitely a correlation to the Taika Waititi stuff that he'd been doing. Things like What We Do in the Shadows, very reminiscent of that.
Yes.
And another group of filmmakers and actors and crew who I'm really excited to see what they're doing in the future, because I can only see them improving on what they're already working on. Yeah.
Now, it was good to end FrightFest on Glasgow on a high with this. So I mean, that unless you've got anything else to add, that kind of, I mean, as usual with a Movie Heaven, Movie Hell podcast, we are going into feature length territory ourselves here. But anything else you want to add about FrightFest Glasgow 2019?
I would just promote FrightFest actually, and see if you're a Glaswegian or you're able to get to Glasgow for next year. Absolutely do it. I think having a film festival that's so heavily loaded over 2 days is absolutely the way to do it, because it's manageable for people to have that kind of time, I think, as opposed to something longer. Like when I've been at the LFF for like 10 days to fortnight, it's hard to see stuff and continue your momentum and so on. So this was brilliant, and because it's a genre festival as well, you're going to see a lot of very niche stuff. Like, for example, Paul told us The Witch Part 1 Subversion may not receive a UK territory screening.
This is very true.
Cinematic release at all.
Yeah.
And to see that sort of a movie in that environment, wow, absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
And a big shout out to the GFT as well. If you're a local, or again, if you're in Glasgow, check out their programming. It's top flight.
I have to say, we didn't go to any of the other Glasgow Film Festival screenings.
No, we were just FrightFest.
The venue and the way it was staffed and the quality of things like the projection and the audio and all of that sort of thing, absolutely, hats off to those guys. So that was really good. And with regards to FrightFest, if you're listening to this and you want to find out more about FrightFest, if you go to frightfest.co.uk, there's information there. FrightFest run a festival twice a year. They run the one in Glasgow. They also run a 4-day festival in London during the August bank holiday weekend every year. Been doing for the last 18 years. And they also run events at Halloween as well. So, if you're a real horror fan, or you've got films that you want to submit to a horror festival, then definitely check that out. William, if people want to get in touch with you or see any of your work, is there anywhere you can find that?
So you can tweet me at WAS_MCL. If you've got anything to complain about or berate me about, feel free to hit me up there. And working wise, actually nothing that I've done is available online as far as I'm aware. You would have to go and IMDb me and order stuff to see anything that I've done sound on and stuff like that. In terms of my own filmmaking at the moment, I am concept developing a short film which will be available hopefully on release within the next year. But that's still at a very early stage, and I'm excited to get moving on that, and then I can start talking about it more. Yeah,
well, I know I'm in the same boat myself, working on various projects. But if you want to see any of my previous work, some of which is definitely in the horror thriller genre category, if you go to YouTube and put in British Eyles, that's EYLES as in my last name, there's some short films that I've made there that you can see, so please check those out. Alternatively, if you want to see any of Simon Aitken's work, that can be found at independentrunnings.com, and there are also updates there about his forthcoming movie Modern Love. If you want to subscribe to this podcast, you can do it through iTunes or the normal podcast catchers. and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Movie Heaven, Movie Hell. Also, I do want to promote that I'm involved with another podcast as well, which is Premiere Scene.
Hi guys.
Yes, hello to Anthony, Claire and Ryan, who I do that podcast with, and more information there can be found at premierscene.net. So please check that out as well. And that just leaves me to thank William for joining me on this adventure.
Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate the taking me to FrightFest and exposing me to all this subversive, horrifying content. Really good. Loved it. No worries. And we hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and we look forward to hearing you on the. We look forward to you joining us, should I say? Oh, it's been a long night. Long weekend.
On the next episode of Movie Heaven, Movie Hell.